All right, welcome to Language Teachers Forum. This year Language Teachers Forum is organized by Dr. Lee Kaman and myself, Keita Ishii. In Language Teachers Forum, we invite teachers to talk about things like curriculum, classroom management strategies, and pedagogies. Today, I have pleasure to introduce Jane Mule, and she is an experienced French teacher working at Queensland Academy of Science, Math and Technology. She's going to today talk about teaching year 11 and 12 French through concurrent delivery in the new QCE.
Thank you, Keita. Thank you. So I might take a seat for the presentation. Hopefully everyone can see okay. So I currently teach French at QASMT. However, prior to that, I was working at Corinda State High School. So basically at the end of 2019, which was my third year at Corinda State High School, I was advised that because of the low numbers of students going into senior, we would need to have a year 11-12 concurrent delivery class. So they specified that it was concurrent delivery, not composite. So essentially that meant that early term for 2019, it was my responsibility to contact the year 10 students and their parents and carers to let them know that in order to align the 2 year levels, they would have to basically start year 11 content immediately. So what that meant in terms of their assessment was that basically it was so surprise, we're no longer doing this for your assessment. We'll actually be learning about the new QCE. And so I tried to really word it in a very positive manner and encourage the students who weren't continuing with French that they would still find it very advantageous to be participating in that. I wasn't able to teach year 10 content as well as the year 11 new QCE in the same setting. So the decision at the school was to just teach everyone the year 11 content and get them all to sit their exams, and then I would be able to report on them based on those results. So that's what we did, and essentially it would align so that the year 11 students would be sitting their FA1 at the same time as the year 12 students sitting their IA1. So, I discussed the fact that, they would still be obliged, even if they weren't continuing French, to join in. But I tried to, frame it in a positive manner and just tell them that it was something really new and it was exciting. They were going to be the guinea pigs, and so I got them on board with that. Basically, in terms of what support I was given, my head of department was really great and she tried to be as supportive of me as possible. However, this was a new situation. It hadn't happened before at the school and I didn't really have anyone that I could talk to about it. I was provided with a document from QCAA providing some tips and guidance, but it was quite perfunctory. I still used it and was able to use that to plan my lessons, but there was nothing particularly practical about it. I was kind of just left to my own devices, which also was kind of exciting. So the key resources that I used, I had made a decision based on my relationship with Krista Luxford at BBC, who was really interested in edXL for her students, which is actually a British, it's part of the British system. She was actually getting her students with the new QCE to be using the edXL textbooks. So I actually got myself a copy of the edXL and I was able to complement the resources that I used with that. It has some really, really great has some really great texts in it, really relevant to what the units are. And so I didn't use a lot of it, but I used a few texts here and there because they were just so great. They were so relevant to the units. So things about, equal marriage, same-sex marriage, changing families, that kind of thing. So that was really useful. Excuse me. I decided to choose the Quite Enough senior French textbook for my students, and each student got their own copy, and I heavily encouraged them to be taking it home with them and to be doing different activities in the textbook based on where they felt their need was. I also used Language Perfect a lot, and that was really helpful for me, not just as a resource to connect my students to, but I actually also used it to compile almost a booklet of some really good key vocab, because they have spent so much time and energy on it, and we pay them this money to sign up, that I thought, let's use it. And it was fantastic. It was a really useful resource for me. So anyone, starting in the new QCE and considering doing, having a class that's concurrent delivery, I would really recommend that they get on board with Language Perfect. And if their school doesn't have a subscription to Language Perfect, to try and advocate for that, because that was really a really useful resource to have, and they're just so great connecting with them, talking to them. They answer your questions immediately. So I also compiled a senior French preparatory handbook for my year 10s that had a lot of things in it. So it had information about how their new course would be structured in terms of what would be looked at. Obviously I hadn't even created it yet. It was all kind of such last minute. So it was quite broad and vague. I didn't go into too much detail, but some of the key things that they really needed to know, like those keywords, tone, purpose, the pact. I had definitions on that. I had examples of what tone would look like. How can you describe tone? All of that kind of stuff. So all that really key stuff that's so key to answering questions with the new QCE, I put all of that in there. I also compiled one go-to resource for different tenses, so that in my lessons with the students, because I was having to kind of support two different levels at the same time, two units at the same time, if the students were struggling with a particular tense and I wasn't doing an explicit grammar instruction activity that lesson, I'd tell them aller au Bible. I'd call it my Bible, and you can go through that tense. It'd be, why do we use it and how do we use it? And I also obviously complemented my teaching with the wide variety of different resources that are already at our disposal. There's so many good websites. TES I used sparingly because there's some things that aren't really relevant there, but France 24, a whole bunch of different language learning websites, Lingua, there's so many, and I'm sure as language teachers you're aware of them all. More than happy to share specific ones with anyone if they're interested. So the very first thing I did is go, oh my God, what am I doing? But the fact that I had confidence from my HOD, she basically said, listen, just do your best, but essentially this hasn't been done before, so just be kind to yourself and just do your best. So I sat down and because I like organising my thoughts, I do have these documents if anyone's interested, but I did like a spreadsheet, and I kind of mapped out, I started to map out my ideas, but I didn't complete it all because that would have just been way, way, way too much, and it would have just overwhelmed me and freaked me out. But I wanted to do this so I could start mapping out and visualizing how it would look if I was teaching two different units at the same time. So I kind of had like a spreadsheet of, this is what I'm doing this week, this is what I'm doing in the next week, and I tried to line up the different tenses based on what I saw in the syllabus. So I basically had the syllabus on the one hand, and I also had my spreadsheet on the other hand, and I was just trying to kind of line it up and match it up. I also organised a lot of peer teaching activities, peer feedback activities. So what I actually thought was such a great opportunity of having 2 different year levels at the same time was for them to actually, you know, almost teach each other. So I'll just skip forward a little bit. Yep, so I provided a lot of learning activities where the 2 year levels could be working together. So for example, in term 2, the year 12s were, you know, talking about responsibilities, moving on, that kind of thing. So I actually got them to prepare motivational piece, you know, so obviously practicing their writing and their speaking for the year 11. So then they would choose a particular student in year 11 to kind of be matched up with, and that year 11 student would be practicing their comprehension. So they'd be responding to English questions about tone, purpose, context, values, attitudes, and that kind of thing. So that to me kind of lined up both units at the same time. So I just tried to mix and match as much as possible. I also, so yeah, peer feedback was a lot of what I did, and doing lots of practice exams. I did so many practice exams and got them to, I didn't just collect them and then mark them straight away. I actually created almost a marking guide and a criteria sheet for the students, and I got them to actually peer mark. So once we did a little practice exam, I mixed them up, you know, swapped them with each other and gave them a criteria sheet, told them to go home, mark it, not to be lenient because I said that's not going to help your peers. Try and be brutal, and we can work through it, but make sure you're brutal based on what the criteria says. And then once that was done, then I actually went over them, and I basically agreed or disagreed with the peer feedback that was given, and then I was able to give them their final grade based on that. And I feel like they really engaged with that process and they understood what was expected of them so much more because they were actually trying to figure it out for themselves rather than me just telling them what was wrong or what was right. Because of the fact that, you know, it was 2 different units at the same time, I made sure that all the learning material that I had for the students was digitally available to them. So I used OneNote predominantly. And so if, for example, you know, in tomorrow's lesson, I had certain resources to go through, you know, for example, with my 1 year level, I was doing family carers and friends. In the other one, it was family responsibilities and moving on. Then I would have their separate resources on their OneNotes for them to be able to access, go through and complete the responses. And I also encouraged them to be doing group work and using collaboration space so that then I could be going through, giving feedback to them, not just in class, but outside of class as well. And I could kind of keep a track on how they're all going. I also did end of unit revision lists for each year level. And I did try to keep that, you know, quite sparing in terms of obviously it wasn't everything, but it was some key expressions, some key vocabulary, and the key packed terminology that they would need to be, you know, fluent in, just that they felt quite comfortable and confident. But I did tell them always that, you know, there will be that level of vocabulary that will be, you know, you'll be unexposed to, and you have to make plausible interpretations based on the context. I just felt that them having that revision list, even if it wasn't exhaustive, it made them feel comfortable. It kind of was a bit of a security blanket for them. So I used, my explicit teaching was really kind of set aside solely for introducing students to those common cognitive verbs. You know, what does it mean to, you know, to be identifying? What does it mean to be creating? You know, so we really explicitly went through a lot of those cognitive verbs because a lot of the, you know, a number of my students were actually not necessarily natively English speaking, and so even those terms, even for myself as a native English speaker, some of those terms are a little bit confusing. So knuckling down on exactly what is being asked of you if, you know, you're being asked to inform or create or identify. We went through that, and also all those packed keywords. So that was explicitly taught to them, and then we did some examples. I also used explicit teaching for grammatical structures. So for example, if we needed to go through the passé composé or the imparfait, then I would explicitly teach that. Even if it wasn't necessarily in the syllabus for the grade 12s, and it was only in for the year 11s at this particular point, I would always use those opportunities for them to all be exposed to it, because essentially both year levels need to be aware of those, all the tenses anyway. I also did a thing called Posez et Répondez, which worked out really well, and I used the syllabus to help me with some of those prompt questions. But in my resources that I provided to the students on OneNote, and they went through during the classes, I always at the start had Posez et Répondez questions. And those were questions to kind of just get them, into the frame of mind of thinking about the particular subject matter that we were going to look at. So it might have been, if we were talking about, being from a different country, it might have been où est-ce que vos parents étaient nés et quelles étaient ses expériences, leur expérience. So, asking just prompt questions to them about thinking about the unit topic, and then I would encourage them to be asking each other to practice their spoken and listening, but I would actually also, and they would know, and I would keep reminding them throughout the weeks when we were looking at that unit, they would know that I would be individually conferencing with them once to ask those questions of them. So they all knew that they couldn't get off just by being a bit lazy and going, I'm not going to prepare responses to that. They all needed to have really solid responses to those, because I would make time with each student during that unit to be asking those, individually pulling them up and asking them those posez et répondez questions. And I also had a little cheat sheet of really, easy to understand pause fillers, because I found that they would often get really stressed if they just lost their train of thought. And I made it into a song, and they knew un moment s'il vous plaît, répétez s'il vous plaît, une autre question s'il vous plaît. I had those just stuck there, and then they'd know, okay, I can buy some time and I can say that while I'm thinking of what to say. So I always made sure that they had access to the relevant language perfect task work for them to be able to do, so that if they had completed the work that was set for them on OneNote and they had responded to it and put that on Collaboration Space or in their own personal section, that they could be then extending themselves and doing that language perfect work as well. And I also told them that they should essentially be doing that for homework as well. And then I already mentioned before about those combined learning opportunities that I used. Some key tips that I would have for anyone who might be in a position to teach in a concurrent manner is just be patient with yourself and your students, because it is something new, and I think it has a lot of advantages, concurrent delivery. I think the students can learn a lot from each other, and it actually forces them to understand that they can't just rely on the teacher to be the fountain of all knowledge. They actually have to, work with each other a little bit more and learn from each other. And I actually thought it worked out to be a really great opportunity, but just be patient with yourself, because it's not always going to work perfectly. Some lessons you'll walk away going, that worked really well, and some lessons you'll walk away going, that just flopped, that didn't really go as well as I thought it would. And you'll, over time, get your repertoire and you'll figure out, okay, this is working, I'll keep doing that, I'm not going to keep doing that. And obviously it depends on your students and yourself as well. I feel like you always have to just pick and choose strategies based on the way you teach as a teacher. I also was connected with the French teacher Facebook group, and I was constantly messaging other teachers. I would email them and we'd share resources. Do that, because if you're the only person in your school that's doing this, you can get to a point where you just feel really resigned and stressed, and you're going to burn out. You need to connect with other teachers who might be doing this, because it is happening. It might not be happening in the one school, but it's happening all over Australia. So just, reach out. Engage your students in discussions about how they would like the lessons to run. So I always had basically a rough idea of what I was going to do for each lesson, but I would not, hold strictly to it. I would, I'm very perceptive to the feeling of the room, and if I was kind of feeling, this is really maybe not hitting the mark, I'd just ask the students, what are you wanting? And they might say, do you know what, we actually really want some, listening practice. And so then I'd just pull out a text and I'd do some practice listening with them. So just allow yourself that flexibility, and the students also really, I think, appreciate being part of their learning, being able to start to control the direction of some of their learning. And some of the students who got the best results were the ones that actually went off in their own direction and, really were able to just manage their own learning. And I feel like concurrent delivery allows that opportunity. And ultimately that's what they're going to have to do when they're at university. If they do go to university anyway, they won't have a teacher sitting by their side, holding their hands, telling them what to do all the time. Allow as many opportunities for peer work as you can, because you might feel as a teacher that you need to be explicitly delivering a lot of things all the time, but in reality the amount of explicit delivery that I did was quite minimal. It was mostly in response to key difficulties, or obviously if we hadn't gone through what tone and purpose and context is and all that kind of stuff, they wouldn't have known. So obviously things like that, when it's for the first time, that all had to be explicitly delivered. But essentially, unless I was hearing from a majority of students, or unless I was getting really similar things wrong in the practice exams, I wasn't doing a lot of explicit teaching. I was really allowing them to be having their discussions with each other, to be working through the work with each other, and to be, solving their own problems. Also, each student has their own weaknesses, and so concurrent delivery allows them the flexibility to be focusing on what their weakness is. Some students would say, I really bombed out. I wrote way too much and I didn't have enough time to respond to the final question. So they would recognise that they needed to work on being concise in their responses. So they would spend the time in class cutting down the responses and things like that. Whereas other students might have gone, I didn't write enough and I need to practice my listening and my comprehension. So they would practice, they would go through and do the activities in the textbook, or they would do language perfect to practice their vocab. That's pretty much it. I didn't want to go into too much detail because I wasn't sure how much of it would be relevant to you all. I do have resources to share, and I have examples of feedback that I've given to students from their practice exams that gave them specific feedback based on the criteria. So how they demonstrated their comprehension, how they demonstrated the understanding of purpose, context and text type, how they demonstrated their analysis and evaluation, and all that stuff they really appreciated. So more than happy to share that with everyone, but I suppose now would be a good opportunity to ask for questions. Yeah.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Did you, you might have said this at the beginning and I might have been busy over here, but how many students did you have approximately?
Yeah, so there were, now it's a while ago,
yeah.
But it was about 27 from memory. So it was something like,
27 combined.
yeah, so it was something like 12 year 11 and 15 year 12. Well, yeah, 12 year 10 to year 11 and 15 year 11 to 12.
It's very unfortunate that you couldn't have separate classes.
Initially, I was, a bit frustrated, but I'm a QTU rep, just putting that hat on, but I also, in my, with my relationship with the union, I was also able to negotiate in a really positive way. It wasn't negative or anything, but in a really positive way, I was able to negotiate having some an extra spare during the week that would never be taken up with covers, and because they recognised that essentially I was kind of, even though it was the one class, I was kind of teaching 2 year levels, and so that required a lot of planning and preparation. But I think another thing that was really important for me was just to go with the flow a little bit, like have the rough idea of where I'm going in terms of having my spreadsheet and going, okay, this is what I need to address here, and this is what they need to be able to show to do well on the exam. But, I might do something a little bit different today, or I might, you have to kind of just be a bit flexible and go with the flow a little bit. I found that that worked well.
So in that kind of classroom, do you assess differently? Assess each year level differently? So you prepare one assessment for year 11, one assessment for year 12?
Yep, so totally different assessments. And what we would do is try and line up, like the reason why we started the year 10s early in term 4 2019 was to start them with the year 11 content, so that when they were doing the FA1, that was exactly the same time as the year 12s doing the IA1. So I believe that it stands for formative assessment. So essentially that's their year 11 assessment, but it doesn't go towards their QCE. The IA1 is what they call like internal assessment as opposed to the external assessments. That's what they do in grade 12, and that counts towards their QCE. So I also told the year 11s time and time again, this is almost a practice run for year 12. So not to kind of encourage them to slack off, none of them did anyway, but just to allow them that, self being kind to themselves, the self-empathy, I suppose. Yeah.
So do you basically teach the same content to 2 year levels, or do you teach content to year 11?
Different content. So that's where I was saying, a lot of what I was doing was not explicit teaching of content. I really, I created the lessons, the work was there, and I would wrap around during the classroom and, go through the work with some of the students, but I wasn't explicitly delivering the content. What I was explicitly delivering were those things that were overlapping, the tone, the purpose, the context, the grammatical structures, the tenses, that kind of thing. Because, I couldn't. Sometimes it depended, and I was flexible with myself. It depended. So if there was something that was quite detailed, if we needed to go through this particular text and it was really detailed, there was a lot of difficult vocab, I'd recognise, they can't do this on their own. We'll make an explicit lesson out of it, and then, because I'm spending the majority of the time with year 11 this lesson, the next lesson we'll do an explicit lesson with this, and I'd focus mainly on the year 12s. But it really, it was so much flexibility, me kind of asking the students, how are you going? How are you tracking with this? And they really got to a point where they appreciated the opportunity to kind of pace their own learning in a way. And a lot of the times, they're at that level where they know, they're in year 11 and 12, they know how to do what they need to do. You're kind of there as a support person, and you're guiding them through, and you're helping them kind of negotiate around the really tricky areas. But essentially, if they want to know what this word means, they can figure it out. So that kind of explicit content delivery, I didn't do very much of that. And with like listening activities, sometimes it would be relevant to both year levels, so I would do it to the whole group then. But a lot of what I did is I provided the listening activities on their laptops, and then they would be basically just connecting through with their laptops, and they'd be doing it with their laptops, and then they'd be talking with each other and putting their responses on collaboration space.
I'm interested in how the students actually perceived all of this. So this is a bit of a lengthy question coming up.
Yeah.
In first instance, I suppose for both the year 10s and the year 11s, the idea of being in the same group came as a surprise.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see, maybe you can illustrate,
Yeah.
what was their initial reaction to having to do this? And how did they respond to it, and what was their final assessment of it, if you like, once it had finished?
Yeah, so I think initially they were a bit afraid, particularly the younger year level, because they were like, oh, why am I going into this class with older students? And I think they felt this fear of the unknown, and I would just encourage them to talk through that with me. And I was just honest with them. I said, you know what, I'm a little bit scared as well. You know, this is the first time that I've done this, and we're working on this together. We're going through this together. But I reassured them, and I said to them, you will all have the capacity, and you will all have the opportunity to do the very best that you can do, and you'll all be able to get the highest possible grades if we just work together. And that's what happened, and they all did really, really well. I had a very small number of students that didn't do that well, but none who failed. I think, to be honest, that's also testament to the fact that if you're in senior languages, you've chosen to be there, you want to be there, so you do work hard. But yeah, I think there was obviously that initial aversion and that initial fear. But towards the end, they actually, because I got some students to come in and talk to, this then happened the following year. So I got some of those students to come in and talk to the other students, the younger students, you know, just kind of giving them a bit of a pep talk because this would happen to them. And the students said, this was a great opportunity. We met people that we normally wouldn't have met. We learnt from them. They've already gone through this and they helped us go through it. The older students really appreciated it because they felt that they were learning through teaching in a way, and just sharing their ideas. And it didn't fit, although yes, they were doing, you know, different units, it felt like they were the same class, like they really got along really well and they connected with each other. So yes, I think obviously when it's something new and you don't understand how it's going to work, there's that aversion and that fear. But ultimately, I think they took to it really well. And I think also it was because of the attitude that I had as well. And I was just I was excited about it. I mean, yes, I was nervous, but I was like, oh, this is new, you know, and I've been given the trust to do this. So, you know, and they all did really well. I was really, really proud of them. And I think they also felt that it did prepare them more for university, because they had to really learn what they needed to do to be able to improve, rather than always having the teacher there telling them to do this and to do that.
And do you know what has happened to the program since you've moved from that school?
My understanding is that because of I don't know if, right now it's also concurrent, so they're also having to do the same thing. And my understanding is that in the future, it will just be the same thing if there are those low class numbers. It's just the matter of the...
How big is the school? Like a cohort? How many students
so
in year 10?
I think there are about... I should know. I think it's about 1,600 or something students in
a year level?
Oh, not in a year level, sorry, all up in the whole... No.
Okay.
It's not state high.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
1,600 total?
Total, yeah.
Multiple languages taught? Or?
So one of the biggest, so it was Chinese, Japanese, French, German, what was the other? Spanish.
Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do other languages also have similar concurrent teaching?
No. No.
Really?
Yeah. And the discussion was, well, you know, if we don't do concurrent, then we can't take them through. And I was like, that's not an option. Yes, it might be a little bit unpleasant for me as the teacher, but for the students, if that means that then they can't continue with the language that they want to do, that's obviously horrible. So yes, it's problematic for the teacher because they almost do feel like they're in a position where they have to make a choice between, do I want to take this on personally, and do, you know, it like, it's an impossible choice. But that's why I just say that, like, it is really important to just be kind to yourself and not to feel like you have to get it all sorted straight away, and also to really ask the students to engage them, because, you know, they really, so many times I asked the students questions. I said, you know, this is what we need to be able to do to show this criterion. What do you think? What should we do? And they were able to give me great ideas, you know, and then it also forces them to be going through that journey of understanding at the same time, so they learn it more. So don't feel that you're on your own. I know it sounds funny, but use the students as well as teachers, because sometimes they can help guide, you know, where you're going, the direction you're going in. Yeah. All good?
Right. Come around here. Yes. Thanks so much.
No worries at all.
Jane, I think a lot of people must be in the same boat, at least just doing the same language. The last year I taught at Palm Beach Currumbin State High School before moving to Griffith. I taught Year 12 French and Year 12 Japanese in the same room at the same time.
Oh my gosh.
Roger Ganderton, a few people know, is kind of a famous German teacher around these days, was actually in the French half of that room. But yeah, we managed, and it was the same thing. Otherwise, they weren't allowed to do the. They wouldn't have been able to do a language.
So were there two teachers there?
No, me.
Oh, who was the other teacher? Did he just come in every now and then?
No, it was just me. I taught both languages, and a bit like you, sharing. Although I would share each lesson, I would spend some time with the French. Did the Japanese
students pick up some French? And
yes.
Yeah. How good is that?
That's nice. Cross-cultural awareness.
Sometimes I would say hi to the French students. And
oh yeah.
Sometimes
yeah.
Because you know, you had to change your mind.
And that's another thing. You know, I'd be answering the question about one unit, and then have to quickly switch to the next unit with my other students. It keeps you on your feet.
Yes.
It's good for your brain, that's for sure.
At least they could share better, being the same language.
Oh, totally. That sounds very difficult.
I'm sure there's a lot of people with whose numbers tend to thin out by year 11 and 12, and and it's great that we do that so the students can continue with their language. Just before we go, I'd just like to mention that there's a few speech contests coming up. We have the Gold Coast Languages Speech Contest run by the MLTAQ on the 25th of July at the Gold Coast campus of Griffith University, and the Brisbane Secondary Speech Contest is on the 1st of August at Nathan campus, and the primary Brisbane Speech Contest is on Sunday the 12th of September, so they're all Sundays. So if you're in those areas, your school is in those areas, like to...
Is the Education Perfect Speech Contest happening as well as a separate competition?
We haven't had a volunteer to convene the whole thing as such, so it's looking like we may not be able to have it. Education Perfect is keen to help again, and we have language conveners for all the languages, but we've been looking for an overall convener. But not as such, not as yet. But yeah, hopefully. And thanks so much, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching.